Bonjour, c'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. Aujourd'hui, j'ai déposé les cartes pour l'autisme au Canada et aussi, en même temps, déposé, pas au Parlement, mais publiquement, les stratégies. Les deux choses travaillent ensemble. Et ça, c'est vraiment important. Et aujourd'hui, c'est une étape importante, mais c'est juste une étape. Let me start by thanking all colleagues and stakeholders for the incredible work that's been done to get to this point. This is for families with autistic people and for autistic people, this can sometimes feel very lonely. This is a community that doesn't often feel seen. They don't feel understood, and they often feel very, very unsupported. They have really felt in many instances that they got their hopes up in different places and that there hasn't been a lot of delivery. And so I want to be really clear about what today is and what today isn't. What today is a really important first step to ensure that we have a map and a compass to get from where we are to where we need to go. And in that, you see a number of my colleagues with me. They'll speak briefly in a couple of moments. But it's so important that it be nonpartisan, that we see that goal of making sure that autistic people can live to their full potential and that we can get to the place where families of autistic people have the proper supports behind them is something we've got to do together. And on that basis, I really want to thank Senator Housakos, Senator Beam, and Mike Lake. Mike and I had an opportunity to talk just before today. He's been an extraordinary leader in this space. He's taught me so much about what families who have an autistic person in their life deal with. And he's been just a ceaseless advocate who every time I speak to him is speaking from a place that is purely about helping people. And I just really respect that and want to thank him for his work. It's been absolutely critical in this process, along with all the incredible stakeholders. So what are we presenting today? Well, the framework is a pathway. It is basically the map of how we get to a point where autistic people can live to their full potential and where families can get the support that they deserve. And my colleagues are going to kind of illustrate in more human terms what that exactly means. But there are 5 areas in the framework of priority, and the strategy kind of goes down deeper on each one of those, telling us how do we actualize the ambition of each of those items in the framework. So that includes economic inclusion, as an example. And economic inclusion would then break out and say, okay, how do we incorporate that into our national housing strategy, as an example? And what's important about this document is that it isn't just, the federal response. It shows what we have to do as provinces, territories, and the federal government together to get to where we need to go. The second area of priority is diagnostic screening and services. Third is tools and resources. Fourth is public awareness, knowledge, and acceptance. Fifth is data collection, public health resources, and surveillance. So the last thing that I'll say before I turn it over to my colleagues to talk about sort of the more human elements of this is the creation, we're also announcing today the calls for application for the National Autism Network. And this is going to include organizations, who have been advocating and are deeply understanding of this space. And critically, and this is so important in everything that we do, it's going to include people with lived and living experience because their voices are so critical to understanding the path forward. So I'm going to start with my friend and neighbor, Ryan Turnbull. Ryan and I have met so many times with the Durham crew. This is a group of people who are families who have autistic people in their lives, who are so passionate. They do anything for their kids. They teach me so much about love. They teach me so much about the joy of having somebody who's an autistic person in your life. and have been incredible advocates. And Ryan has some personal reflections on that. I'll turn it over to Ryan Turnbull.
Well, thank you, Minister, and it's really great to be here. This is a really big step forward. I wanted to share just a little bit about the lived experience of people in my riding and across Minister Holland and I's region, which is Durham region, and I'm sure right across the country there are advocates that are passionately been advocating for often their kids, but also adults with autism in their families. And those families have shared with me time and time again and inspired me by their relentless efforts to advocate for their children and just the dire need for supports and services and the difference that that really makes for those families. So this framework and the strategy that's being released today are a big step forward. I think it's really encouraging for those families to see us as a government working collaboratively across party lines and really trying to get the supports that those families need. I'll share also that I have a personal story with my nephew who is on the spectrum, and he's just a wonderful kid. His name's Cash. And I've watched our family go through, the struggles of truly trying to get the access to therapy and support, and the amount of difference that that's made for Cash and his life. There's a whole world of opportunity that's opened up as a result of his parents working extra jobs and struggling to make ends meet, but really providing that therapy. I think in terms of this framework and strategy, I hope that our government can continue to work with provinces and territories and all of the advocates and service providers out there that are so important to having a really robust support system for all people who live with autism to be full-fledged participating members in all aspects of life in our society. And so it's a great day to be here. I feel very passionate about this, and thank you to the Minister and your team for such great work on this. I know these families have often felt like different levels of government have not necessarily stepped up to provide enough support. I think we're here today to say we're taking a stand. We are stepping up to support. Obviously, we'll need everyone else to come along with us, but I look forward to that collaborative path forward. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ryan. Still so much more work to do, and we want to acknowledge that, and I appreciate your advocacy. I also have a friend who's deeply passionate in this space and done a tremendous amount, Leah Taylor-Roy.
Thank you, Minister. And I just want to share a little bit about the experience of families with children living with autism, and especially their journey as the children grow into adulthood. And I've worked with families who have members who live with autism, and to see the amount of effort they put into helping the children that they love so much, children who are really, in many instances, very unique, very special. But the range of abilities that children living with autism has is broad. And some have more abilities than others. The amount of therapy that's needed, the diagnosis, there's often comorbidities with other things going on, ataxia to do with obviously eating disorders at times. So they're very stressed. And if you don't have the resources, if families don't have the resources they need, it's very difficult to help these children the way they want to be helped. And as a mother, I often see parents, mothers in particular, but both parents, who feel the stress and the strain of trying to help these children when they're not able to access the resources they need. And recently we've seen provincial governments that have cut back on funding and the way they're providing funding. So I think this is an incredible show of leadership from our government, and I love that it is a nonpartisan, it's across the aisle, and that we've developed the framework and the strategy in collaboration with people who have the lived experience. And I'm very hopeful, and I know that the families who have children and young adults living with autism will be very grateful for this strategy, and I'm sure they're going to be part of it as we develop more services through this. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, it's my pleasure to turn it over to my friend Francesco Sorbora, who's been a real advocate in this space. Francesco.
Thank you, Minister, for this opportunity, and thank you, Minister, for the leadership on this very, very important file. And I'm going to emphasize the word important because every day we all wake up in the morning, we come to work and with our respective families or partners and so forth. And there are many, many families across this country that when they wake up, they they need to bring their children to a facility, to a school, to a home when they're dealing with autism. And we want these kids to live a full life like any other kid would like to live, including my 3 daughters. In the city of Vaughan, I need to give a shout out to 2 wonderful organizations. One for over 25 years that is now running 3 schools for autistic children, the Shining Through Center for Autistic Children, Fred and the whole team there, Joe and Tom, God bless you. And also Waves of Change for Autism. About 10 days ago, I attended a fundraiser, over 750 people. This organization's raised over $2 million to help families with autistic children. And again, people coming together. I will go back to the word I used at the beginning. This is important. I'm so honored to be standing here with the Minister of Health, my honourable colleague, Honourable Holland, because families in Canada need help. They need leadership. And today we are demonstrating leadership from the federal government for introducing a framework, not only a framework, but as Mark and I were chatting about, and he was pointing out, a strategy. And we need that federal leadership because no Canadian deserves to be left behind. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Avant les questions, je peux dire brièvement que les discours de mes collègues, c'est quelque chose vraiment avec la spontanéité, parce que je pense que l'expérience est importante de dire l'expérience actuelle. Mais c'est le cas, même si que tous les députés qui sont ici viennent d'Ontario, l'expérience existe partout au pays. Et c'est une expérience universelle. Et alors, maintenant, je suis prêt pour votre question.
Minister Holland, I see you're wearing your fleur-de-lis tie, so maybe if this is on your mind, but can the government meet the Bloc's demands in time, and is it worth it to be kept in power for the next year?
So you can recall, it kind of brings me back to my days as House Leader. And, are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? They're demanding this. They're demanding that. And I think you see it with what we're doing today on the framework and strategy for autism, which you've got to keep your heart and your mind entirely focused on delivering results and doing the right thing. And so there's a lot of, different parties have different priorities and they're going to table them. As House Leader before we had a supply and confidence agreement, you navigate that with your values and the values of the country. And you look for points of intersection. But none of us are here. I've won, I've lost, I've come, I've gone, I've done other things in my life, I will do other things in my life. The question that I know all of our colleagues are asking is, in the time that you have in office, and you don't know. I mean, tomorrow's a promise to no one. I don't even know if I'm alive at the end of the day. The only thing that we have in life is to look in the mirror and say, in the moments you had, you did what was right. And so you're going to say, well, that's circuitous, you're not being specific about that proposal. There is a million different proposals at any given time.
But will you pass these 2 bills?
Well, I'm neither the House Leader nor the Minister responsible for the file. I know as a fact that those and a myriad other conversations are happening, and that what I would say is that ultimatums are unhelpful. That trying to lay down markers, do this or else, that is not the model of a strong and functioning government. And we're all involved in that. Minority government is a shared responsibility here, folks. When we come to this place, we're elected. Canadians expect us to be here for 4 years and get things done. So, it seems lately that there is a political fever that has gripped this place, where some people are far more excited about an election than getting things done. And look, I understand that creates a lot of attention, a lot of noise. But is that really what's in the best interest of people? And I would say what's in the best interest of people is to demonstrate every day that what you're doing is trying to find a way to make this Parliament work for people, not looking for a way to engineer an election, hoping that you can have some wedge issue that you can take into a campaign and get some more seats with.
Minister, yesterday the Prime Minister used the word crap in the House of Commons. He is the leader of the government. I'm wondering what this says about the tenor going forward and whether or not the Liberals have abandoned the high road when it comes to debate in the House.
I don't know if you watch Question Period. If you watch Question Period, I've been in this place since 2004. The way with all due respect, the way the Conservative Party is comporting themselves is equivalent to out-of-control frat house. Listen to the things they're yelling, right? It is deplorable. You know, the homophobic nonsense being thrown around yesterday, and, you know, we're just supposed to every day deal with this frat house nonsense. As I said, it's like they're taking the strategy from the movie Mean Girls, you know, and this is what we face every day. And so, yeah, it's a very, you know, I really, at the end of the week, and I talk to my partner, and I wonder, well, how do you respond to this? You know, I think we're really having trouble, and sometimes you get frustrated. I don't know. That's what human beings do. I don't know if somebody's screaming and yelling at you and denigrating you and making personal slurs, and they do that all day long, and that's your workplace? Like, what other workplace would this stuff be acceptable? Take a look at their behavior. Now, sometimes I own it. I'm not a perfect person. I make mistakes. Sometimes I overreact. Sometimes I get emotional. But I walk into that place as a servant of the house, and I try to comport myself as such. And I think every Canadian should hold people to that behavior. And you're going to wag the dog, pet the donkey, ride the goat nonsense. Like, what does that stuff even mean? These slogans and nonsense. And then in between, screaming, you're going down. Yeah, that's one we're taking. We got your seat. You're done. Like, what?
Permettez-moi de jouer l'avocat du diable dans tout ça. Est-ce que la façon dont il se comporte n'est pas un reflet de la façon dont une partie de la société se sent présentement?
Je pense que c'est un temps tellement difficile pour toutes les personnes partout au monde. Et c'est quand il y a une situation comme ça, il y a deux choix. Internaliser les choses qui sont difficiles et s'attaquer nos états mentaux. Ou deuxièmement, de jeter les choses à l'autre personne. Et c'est évident partout maintenant au pays. Il y a des personnes qui sont dans un état terrible parce que toutes les mauvaises nouvelles existent à l'intérieur de la personne et les personnes attaquent lui-même. Mais il y a des autres personnes qui utilisaient des choses, des inquiétudes et toutes les choses comme ça, et jettent à l'autre personne. Et pour moi, c'est quand il y a un temps mondialement aussi difficile qu'aujourd'hui, reste gentil. Parlez avec la sympathie pour d'autres personnes. Comprends bien que c'est un temps difficile pour toutes les personnes partout au monde maintenant. Et agir dans une façon comme ça. Oui, c'est pas moi, pas ma responsabilité de juger ça. Éventuellement, c'est le peuple du Canada va faire une décision de ça. Mais pour moi, je pense que c'est tellement important. Juste une fois, s'il vous plaît, regarde le période de questions. Et c'est un cercle. C'est le chaos total. Et pour moi, ce n'est pas évident dans l'action du Parti conservateur que l'intérêt de le peuple du Canada est là. Ce n'est pas évident. C'est évident que c'est un type de jeu pour le Parti conservateur, et ce n'est pas le cas pour moi.
What is your response to Mr. Poilievre calling the pharmacare plan radical and his assertions that it will spell the end of private dental plans and everyone's going to lose their coverage?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not radical to me. A woman having access to the contraception she needs isn't radical. And I would say, and I'll just start on that point, if you say, and I would say to the Conservative Party, how are you going to help women with their sexual and reproductive freedom? Are you taking a clear and unequivocated position on abortion and a right to choose, and saying that continuing that debate and allowing to kind of play footsie with different elements of that is somehow okay, so you can kind of exist in shadows, say one thing in a room, oh, don't worry, we're with you, you know, we're not in favor of abortion, and then you sneak into another room and you say, oh, don't worry, we're not going to change anything. And then they can pretend that somehow they're standing up for women's sexual and reproductive rights. And, okay, you're going to do that, and then also you're not going to be in favor of women being able to get the contraception they need? And let's be really clear. Let's be really clear about choice. Right now, for a lot of women, the only thing they can afford is oral contraceptives. Oral contraceptives have a very high fail rate. And other women who have means can choose an IUD that has an almost 0% fail rate. So if you got money, you got freedom about when you start a family or if you start a family. If you don't, then you don't have that freedom. Is it radical to say that all women deserve the same condition and the same autonomy over their own body? I don't think that's radical. I think that's just. And I would say the same thing about a diabetes patient. You know, this country, it costs $30 billion a year right now around that to manage diabetes. And a lot of the problem of why it's so bad is because people can't afford their medication. I'm talking to doctors. I got patients in front of me. They said there was a doctor in Scarborough I'm talking to. He said, why am I even seeing these patients? They come in and I tell them the medication they got to take and they can't afford it. And what happens? Then they get much more sick. Is it a radical idea that somebody who has diabetes should be able to get the access to the medication that they need? And if Poilievre is against it, and okay, so he comes out, I'm against pharmacare. Well, then what's your alternative? What do you say to a person who can't afford their diabetes medication? What he's really saying is too bad. Too bad, you're on your own. And really, it's the kind of society Mr. Poilievre is selling generally. Take what you can get, leave everybody else to their own, you're on your own, kid. That isn't the society that Canada has been. That isn't the foundation of the success of Canada. I would say it's not even the values of Canada. If there is a radical person in the House of Commons, it is Poilievre and the type of Canada that he wants to advocate for.
Eventually there are people who feel that the pharmacare bill doesn't go far enough and that the universal pharmacare part of it isn't in the binding element of the bill. So what's your response to that?
Well, I'll give a direct answer and then a more general one. So in the first order, this is a stages and gates approach. There's not universal consensus on where we go. But what is fair is we have a model here, which is single-payer universal for these two classes of drugs that's going to be publicly delivered. And and we already have an MOU with British Columbia, so people can see exactly how that would look and live like. And that was one of the reasons before an agreement and during the Senate process that we wanted that MOU so people could see it. And there's going to be an opportunity to build evaluation around that. There's going to be a committee that's going to look at the costs and what are the implications of bringing forward this system. That's what a responsible government does, right? You move in stages and gates and you're iterative so that you make sure you're getting it right. You don't just jump to an end outcome because there's huge cost implications and rightful questions about whether or not it would work. That's why we're moving slowly. But let me pull it back for a second to talk about people with autism. I go and I sit in a room with families who have people who are autistic or people who have autism in their family, and they're like, this incremental, like you got a framework and a strategy. Do you know what my life is like right now? What do you think? This isn't good enough. You know, I met Lewis 2 nights ago. I'm at a reception for ALS. I meet a guy who gets an ALS diagnosis. Lewis, his life is just like a meteor hitting his life. You know, and me looking at Lewis and saying, incrementally, we're working, we're doing this, we're getting better, we're moving towards solutions. When your life is blown up by a disease, talking about incrementalism, it just doesn't sound very good. And so I get that. I get that on pharmacare too. But here's the thing, you never get to the top of a mountain unless you walk the steps. And it's in that slow prosecution of progress, of every day waking up and making things just an inch or two better. That's how we have gotten where we are today. That's how we got from, you know, caves to cities, right? It doesn't happen overnight, but there's a concept. There's nothing more powerful in human conception than compound interest. One good thing builds upon another. And if we're going to get to a good state, we can't move backwards. We've got to keep moving forwards.
Minister, there's a court challenge right now, a charter challenge in Ontario Superior Court in regards to Track 2 MAID from disability groups who say that the law is discriminatory, that it gives the government an out, uses death as an out, as opposed to providing solutions and improving resources for people with disabilities so they can sustain and keep on going with their life. How do you respond to that? And do you feel that the law as it was created is sound?
Let me say that every human life has such profound value and that it is our obligation in every instance to lift people up and allow them to live to their potential and to use, and we live in a time of miracles where, you know, diagnoses in 10 years ago that were a death sentence and torture now are manageable conditions. And that's the world we're moving to. That is our focus every day, is life and improvement of life. The question around MAID, and I'll be very direct here. My uncle, who's a wonderful, beautiful man, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And he made the decision when he got deep enough into that disease, when his death was imminent, that he wanted to die on his terms and not face the last ravages of cancer. I think it's fair that somebody can make that choice. I don't know what my choice would be, but I want to be able to make that choice. You know, if I got a terminal diagnosis tomorrow, I'm about to turn 50, and I think about this every day. Arnold Chan was one of my closest friends in this world. And watching Arnold and what he suffered and what he continued to wake up and do, you know, he went through just, I don't know what I would do. I don't think any of us can know until you're in that situation what you can do. But I think there is a moment at which, when you have a terminal diagnosis, where you get to make the decision about how you want to end your story, you know. And and everybody should be empowered to continue that journey every second that you want to continue it. But when you have a terminal diagnosis, these are difficult questions. And we have difficult questions. Quebec's asking the question right now, and I'll be direct. Blossom was my grandmother. Blossom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And she brought so much joy to our life, even with, you know, even through the throes of Alzheimer's. But there was a stage at which she was moved into a long-term care facility in a vegetated state where she couldn't talk, she couldn't feed herself. You know, that's a fair question. We need to have a dialogue about that. I'd say that we don't talk enough about death as a society. It's coming for all of us. And we need a mature conversation around where those lines are. And that's why I'm kind of saying, generally, let's slow down. Like, you know, like, let's have these conversations. Let's make sure that in our families and as a society and with the provinces and territories that we have the right conversations, because these are immensely complicated and personal subjects. So, you know, are we getting it perfectly right? I would say in what exists today, for where somebody has a terminal diagnosis and there is a certainty of their death, that, to me, I've just explained why I think that that is important. But, you know, in terms of what else is there, we got deeper conversations.
Actually, this charter challenge is actually about people who don't have a reasonably foreseeable death, so wouldn't fit most of what you've just described.
That's it, yeah. And
that it leads to people dying prematurely. Could you respond to that directly?
Yeah, and I think that's the active conversation. Remember, we had a conversation around... No, I understand that. And I think that, remember, the cases that I talked about represent about 93% of the cases they represent. So there's a small number of cases that don't fit that scenario. And I think we're having a debate as a society, very passionate debate with very, very, very heartfelt opinions on both sides. Dealing with Track 2, dealing with, you know, mental health as a sole underlying condition, dealing with advance requests. And what I'm saying is that, you know, this is something that we've got to wrestle out as a society, and I think it's something we have to be very careful not to politicize.
Should it be the law if we're still having these discussions?
Well, I think that, you know, there's... I'm not the Minister of Justice, and so talking about the justice implications of it are not really... I'm kind of wandering into an area that I'm not really the right one to ask. But I would say that I'm just trying to give you a color for the complexity of these issues, and I could bring stories that would bring you to your knees from people who are in that Track 2 situation, who are asking for this and want it, and who feel very passionately on the other side. There's no black and white easy answers on this stuff. Okay, thanks so much, folks.